So we have the best of the best speakers here to share their knowledge with you, and we're going to grow and together create this powerhouse city through our organizations, and I'm really glad that you're here. So without further ado, I will start with our opening entertainment, phenomenal singer that's going to welcome us into this space. Our day is tight, a lot of information to get, and we're going to jam it into 25-minute sessions, but I know you're ready for that. I can see the alertness in your eyes. And so we're so glad that you're here, and I won't take up much time because we have a day to get through, and it's going to be a wonderful exercise for us all. Thank you all.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with a harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on to victory is won.
We are so happy to have Mr. Jackson here with us this morning. And he is going to say a few words to us. So thank you, Mr. Jackson.
First of all, can people just say who they are, what organization, what city? That's fine. If people can just say who they are, what organization, what city, so we know who's in the room.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Williams. I'm the Deputy Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and I work with the state agencies in Illinois.
Good morning. My name is Verdelsky Miller. I'm the director of Boom Squad Incorporated. We are a youth development organization located in Evansville, Indiana.
Good morning. I'm Angelique Power. I'm the president of the Field Foundation.
Good morning. I'm Deacon Vince Price. I'm a professional student with Black Star.
Good morning. Malik Nevels, executive project manager for the Safer Foundation.
With me, Reverend Otis Monroe, president of Monroe Foundation and minister with Albany Community.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tony Land. I am with the External Affairs Division with the State of Illinois agency known as the Comptroller's Office under the auspices of Ms. Susanna Mendoza.
I'm Senior Naval. I'm with the Airlock St. Vincent Family Services in Chicago, Illinois, under the charge and overseer.
I'm Francine Shalunas from Airlock St. Vincent Services, and I am the Director for Mission Integration.
Michael Alexander, here with my staff.
I'm Coffin Alexander, and I'm the Chicago Public Schools.
Oh, Thomas Wortham III. I'm here with the Thomas Wortham IV Foundation that's been dormant. We've done nothing, so I'm here to get information so we can get active.
Buenos días, I'm Rubén Martinez. I'm the a sociologist with Michigan State University, the director of the Julian Zamora Research Institute, and one of the board members of Mi Alma in Lansing, Michigan.
Nino Rodriguez, also president of Mi Alma in Lansing, Michigan.
Norma Roseman, Chicago, Illinois. I'm the director of Me. And I'm here to learn from what I hope is the best, what I've heard is the best. Thank you.
Sister Erica, Peacemakers Worldwide, here in Chicago, have a youth and employment organization.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Darius Ballinger, founder and executive director of Chasing 23 Empowerment Group, a nonprofit organization focused on improving life outcomes for boys and young men of color.
Good morning, Eric K. Williams, Empowerment Resources International here in Chicago. We actually provide safe retirement benefits and money for nonprofits.
Good morning, everyone. My name is LaKendrick Williams. I'm here on behalf of Windy City Cares of the National Cares Mentoring Movement, where I'm the executive director of Windy City Cares, and also a financial analyst with Northrop Grumman.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanya White. I am with Good Life Foundation, and I support individuals with developmental disabilities after they finish school.
I'm Vera Steen Wardlaw, retired Chicago Public School teacher, founder and executive director of Connections to the Future, which provides educational enrichment opportunities for elementary school children.
There's only one bad question that you will ever know today. And that bad question is the one that you don't ask. So today, we put together what we think are, what we know are some of the top presenters in the country to answer, to do presentations and to answer your question. At that point, through, and thank you guys very much for being here.
So just two housekeeping. We do have evaluations in our folder, so we're asking, following every speaker, that you take a moment to fill out the evaluation. Now, there's a tradition in the African American culture that's call and response. This is a Powerhouse morning, so when I say power, if you would, please say house. And we're going to power, house, power, house, power, power, house, house. Miss Angelique Power, would you please join us?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Angelique Power, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm the president of the Field Foundation. I want to first say thank you to Brother Philip Jackson for inviting me to come and open the day today. I'm also really grateful to Reverend Monroe. We spent a lot of time together this week already and in the past couple years, and Doc Finney, who is not here. But I think of Rev Monroe and Brother Philip Jackson and Doc Finney as my OGs. From the time that I started at Field, they have really reached out to introduce me to people that I need to know, to sit with me privately and inform me on things that I need to know, and frankly to provide me with some cover to do the type of work that I do, to talk about institutionalized racism and philanthropy like I talk about. And then to try to work on how to dismantle the inequity in that space. So I really couldn't do the job that I do without your support, and so I wanted to start with some gratitude for that. I began my journey nearly 2 years ago at the Field Foundation, which is an entity that was formed in 1940 by Marshall Field III, the grandson of the original Marshall Field who started the Marshall Field stores. Marshall Field III was a little bit different than others in his family, and I've been recently doing more research about him. He was one of the largest funders, donors to Saul Alinsky, which I just found out recently. I think that's interesting. And a lot of the early grants of the Field Foundation were geared toward social justice, what we would call today social justice and racial justice work. Marshall Field V is currently on the board and has been on the board for over 50 years. He has never been the board chair of the Field Foundation. And in talking with him, he'll tell you the reason he's never been the board chair is because he understands that his voice carries an extra weight in the boardroom. And so he doesn't want to overextend his power. And I think that's a really interesting philanthropic practice that I would love to see institutionalized in some way. Part of the making sure you don't overextend your power is even in the way that the Field Foundation has been set up. We are not a family foundation, and there's nothing wrong with family foundations. I mean, families form, they take their money, they form a foundation, and they give with their own proclivities to what they care about. But the Field Foundation was established as a private, independent foundation, which means while we have family members on the board, they're only 20% of the board. 80% of the board are non-family members. While family foundations can set structures around what they care about and have a really quiet proposal process, private independent foundations cannot. They have a strategy, they have to be transparent about that strategy, and they can work on things that they feel, again, it's still in the personal proclivities of the foundation, but there's a little bit more accountability built into being a private independent foundation. Our board is 50% people of color. Nationwide, foundations on average have 14% people of color. And so 57% reflects more of Chicago as foundation boards should. Our staff is also over 50% folks of color. Starting in the late 1980s, the CEO, and actually the last 3 CEOs of the Field Foundation have all been black. And in fact, the first CEO, and not just black, but fearless, bold, game-changing CEOs of the Field Foundation. Handy Lindsay was the first president of the Field Foundation, who some of you may not know, but he is a venerable African-American visionary who is still in philanthropy today. He was followed by Ori Pennick, who you will, if you don't know, you will soon, because she follows me on the agenda. And she is bold and brilliant and brings this Maxine Waters realness into the space. And Ori led the foundation with sharp insight until she retired 2 years ago, and I took over. So when I began at the Field Foundation, it was July 2016, and there were a few things at play. One, the Laquan McDonald video had surfaced 7 months prior, which showed locally and nationally not only the depth of systemic racism in the city of Chicago, but the depth of collusion in upholding the systemic racism. The second thing that was going on at that point was the state budget had been frozen for a year. And so nonprofits that are already emaciated had not been able to receive funding for a year at that point. So the calls to foundations to try to fill the gap of that funding were coming in regularly. The state budget crisis would continue for another full year. The third thing was that I had been at a different foundation, the Joyce Foundation, and I had been studying anti-racism organizing for the last 6 years and had become really a skeptic of philanthropy, and felt, and often I still do feel, that philanthropy is a major part of the problem, that we are actually in the way of what we say we're trying to achieve. And so I come to the Field Foundation in an interview process, very honest and transparent about my skepticism, very honest and transparent about the belief that racial equity needs to be not a side project that comes in later, but at the center of anything we try to do. And I think because of the path that was laid down by Handy and then Ori, because of the drumbeat of the issues around us in Chicago and nationally in July of 2016 is when Trump is on the scene stumping around comments about Mexicans, comments about Muslims, comments about African countries, comments about the entire city of Chicago. So I think the drumbeat led us all to agree that we would go on a path and a journey that we have been on for the last 2 years. An important component of our journey was racial justice training for the board and the staff. We also created heat maps around the city of Chicago based on this central question of how do race and need align in the city. And our website is www.fieldfoundation.org. You will be able to pull up a letter I wrote about everything that I'm talking about, a website version of everything that I'm talking about. I'm being a little bit more honest right now. But you'll be able to pull up a letter of everything that I'm talking about. You'll see, you can download all of the heat maps in a PowerPoint, and you can see a process map of what we've gone through. But what it led us to understand was that the need and the inequity in the city of Chicago is not happening by happenstance, but it is in fact exquisitely designed racial inequity, systemic inequity. And at the Field Foundation, it prodded us and allowed us, through this collective understanding, to change our framework and our giving model. So we now commit the majority of our dollars to organizations of color, to organizations that are based on the west and the south sides of Chicago. And more importantly and less publicly, we've changed our impact metrics. So it's one thing for a foundation to say that they're doing things differently. But then behind the scenes, once you create a grant, the foundation will have metrics that will hold you to impossible goals. And so we all know that there are outputs that you get from a project and outcomes. Outputs could be things like how many people were served, how many people attended workshops. You can have qualitative things like the evaluation that you're going to fill out today. That is all really helpful. But some of the questions that foundations will ask is, how did this workshop decrease violence in the city of Chicago? And that's not a fair question to ask, right? So what we have changed internally is our impact metrics are not about asking nonprofits to create fiction to make us feel better about our grant dollars. Our impact metrics are actually based on ourselves. What have we done in 3, 5, 10 years to get closer to some of the things that we claim we want to achieve? How have we changed indicators of need on the south and west side without changing demographics? If we change the demographics, then we have failed as a foundation. We are also, behind the scenes, rethinking investments. Where are our investments going? Who is managing that money? We are also turning ourselves inside out to dismantle the fallacy of expertise in philanthropy. We are not the experts. Even though many of us have worked in nonprofits before we came to foundations, we're the investors and the donors, we are not the doers. And that's something that gets twisted a lot inside of philanthropy. So that's what we've been up to at the Field Foundation. And I think what's important to say also is that we aren't done. We haven't checked all the boxes and arrived at racial equity and eradicated racism in the city of Chicago. And so hold us accountable. Let us know when we are letting you down. Let us know when we're not being transparent or not returning phone calls, or you can't come in and you can't meet with us and see us and tell us what you're working on. We are on a journey, and we're only 2 years into it. So, the task that's set before us today is really a significant one. How do we invest in Black communities? How do we see assets in communities and build wealth for each other for generations to come? How do we move power and resources to where they have long belonged and where they are regularly extracted? So a few stats that I wanted to share given the assignment of the day. First, we often talk in deficit when we talk about our communities. But the Survey of Business Owners, which is a survey created by the U.S. Census that provides comprehensive, regularly collected information on selected economic and demographic characteristics for businesses and business owners, holds some really incredible information. First, the findings show that the number of minority-owned firms in the U.S. rose from 5.8 million to 8 million between 2007 and 2012. So this includes a 34.5% increase in the number of Black-owned firms, from 1.9 million to 2.6 million Black-owned firms. So in total, 9.4% of all U.S. firms were, and this is 2012 data, were Black-owned. So here's the kicker of that. Cook County, Illinois, led all the counties nationwide in the number of Black-owned firms. 110,155 Black-owned firms in Cook County, Illinois were reported in 2012. So there is a lot of opportunity for us to reinvest our dollars smartly. The other piece of information I want to share is more of a warning. We are losing our people. We're leaving Chicago in droves, frankly. So according to population estimates released a few weeks ago by the U.S. Census Bureau, while the exodus has slowed compared to last year, the population in the city of Chicago is continuing to shrink. The new figures indicate that the city proper had a net loss of nearly 4,000 residents, many of whom are Black. In fact, Chicago has been losing African Americans, but gaining whites, gaining Asians, gaining Latinos. And the last note, the racial wealth gap is real and growing. According to the latest research from Prosperity Now, only 1/3 of Black households own their homes. A little more than 40% of Latino households own their homes. Compare that to 54% of white households. And you can draw a line between this and the median household income, which is $30,303 for Black households, and you double that and you get the amount for white households, which is $70,960 on average. How do we not only build resources for ourselves, but how do we build safety nets? How do we build parachutes and cushions for our loved ones when we pass on? How do we become investors so our entire community receives dividends? That's really what I think we're doing here today and studying and learning here today. So thank you for allowing me to open the day and share a little bit about what we're doing at the Field Foundation. I'm happy to answer any questions about the work that we're doing. Yes?
No, not so much about the Field Foundation.
Yes.
Ms. Power, but you made some significant assessments. And I want to talk a little bit about the piece that you have from Prosperity Now in terms of the median income. What is that being affected by in your guesstimation?
I mean, a lot of it, you can do back mapping to trace what jobs are available, and what are the requirements to get those jobs that are available. So we have a gap that's growing in terms of education level, and not just education level, access to certain jobs in our economy. We're seeing a hollowing out of middle-class, blue-collar jobs. And so while every city in America is turning themselves inside out to get Amazon to come, the jobs that Amazon offers, the six-figure jobs that Amazon offers, aren't going to be offered to those of us in our communities. And so there's a practical reason of technology that's changing the way we work. There are economic reasons like Uber that comes in and hollows out, opportunities for folks to get jobs, and soon there'll be self-driving cars that will remove even more jobs. But then there's also the inequity in the education system that prevents folks from getting access to the type of knowledge to build the skills that are needed to earn higher net worth jobs.
So it's more readiness than anything else?
I think so, and it's also a change in the economy that's happening now, but in the future it's going to be, upon us. Yes, ma'am.
You indicated that the Field Foundation is changing its focus.
Yes.
On organizations of color.
Yes.
Does that mean organizations of color that are led by people of color?
Yes. So we have a term we use, we call it LANA, African, Latinx, Asian, Arab, Native American. We commit 60% of our dollars will go to ALANA organizations by, for, about. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, by what?
By, for, about.
By, for, and about. So it does not have to be led actually by a person of color. Because there are a lot of not-for-profits, as you well know, that are predominantly color in terms of the client base and the staff, but they're led by white.
So this is a really interesting question. We talk about this a lot. And internally, the way we talk about this is we have two classifications. The first is straight up ALANA. That's literally what we call it, straight up ALANA. Like, there's no question about it, right? Everyone in the organization, for the most part, are folks of color. But then there is this situation that you talk about where you could be based on the South or West Side, you can have majority folks of color on your board, on your staff, served, and you can have a white leader. So does having a white leader preclude you from the ALANA classification? And what we talk about is, the difference between diversity and racial equity is it isn't about token representation of a person, right? There are people of color who do not have a racial equity lens at all. And they are leading organizations. So just being a person of color does not mean that you are doing this work. There are white people who do have a racial equity lens. And so if we are moving away from demographics as representation, token representation, then we have to be open to actually being in dialogue and understanding how racial equity manifests itself inside of those organizations. So straight up ALANA and gray area ALANA.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add my 2 cents to
Please.
what you all were just saying about the housing. I have a heavy mortgage lending background.
Yes.
And one of the things in our culture, when our children have gone out and gotten great jobs, great educations, everything, it's almost a rite of passage. And it is considered the norm to move to the suburbs instead of staying in the city. And we allow space for regentification as opposed to gentrifying. Even if you want to live in the suburbs, invest in Big Mama's house. Don't lose Big Mama's house. So that when it's time and you want to come back, then you can't afford to move back in the community that you started in. So I've been having a lot of conversations with my younger, let's say 30 and under family members that have achieved and great income. You've got to maintain and reinvest in the city community and ownership. And that's something I think that we need to get all our organizations and within our families. And when we have that 10:30 in the morning financial discussion on Saturday mornings, that we have got to really hone in and focus on. We've got to hold on.
Thank you. Thank you. Shanita.
So, Angelique, so if you had to give one word of advice to the doers, right, from the donor or investor perspective, what would you tell us, small organizations that really want to do some work for whatever our mission may be?
What would I tell you about your work for your mission?
What would your advice be from the donor investor perspective to the doers that are wanting to do our work that's aligned with our mission?
That helps you get funding?
Yes.
Okay, because I was going to say, I can't, you are much smarter than I am about your work.
Thanks for clarifying.
I can't counsel you on that.
Let's get the support from the donors.
Well, first of all, I have to say this, and I said this recently to a room full of local and national funders. We owe a big debt of gratitude to Philip Jackson, because 2 years ago, before I started, the other thing that was going on was Philip Jackson was on the radio, he was standing in front of MacArthur Foundation, and he was calling foundations to account of where their dollars were going, and more importantly, where their dollars were not going. And so, needless to say, Philip Jackson is right. There is not enough investment, and there's no accountability. So, one of the first things that I did with my board on the first board meeting that I attended was I came to talk to them about my evaluation of the Field Foundation and what the journey's going to look like and meow, 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 but I came to talk to them about Philip Jackson. And I did research. I looked back 5 years of where our funding had been at the Field Foundation and how much had gone to these Olana organizations and how much had gone to the southwest side of Chicago, so that when we began our journey, we had a benchmark of where we could go. So the pressure, I mean, it's like I could tell you all the trite things that people say from foundations, like do good work and like get to know a program officer and meow, 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 you know. The truth is, unless there is community pressure on philanthropy to give dollars and be accountable about where their dollars are going, they aren't going to change their giving. There are more foundations right now, I think, talking about the words racial equity. There are more trainings happening on the staff level, not on the board level yet, but on the staff level where program officers are really getting themselves informed on what this looks like. Without external pressure to have foundations report out on where their dollars are going on an annual basis and to have some sort of metrics in terms of their giving, I don't know how to advise you to get the dollars you deserve.
Pressure, that's what I heard.
Pressure is right. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the comments that you've made and for taking the foundation in the direction that you're taking it. My question has to do with the shift from the social democratic order, which is, given the age of the people in the room, that's the one that most of us grew up under, and the rise of the neoliberal order, which is the one that the young people are growing up under. And the differences in the social order and what that means for how we conduct our work in the community.
I feel like you could probably give a lecture on that I would take notes on. What I would say is that I think that we are in an interesting civil rights moment right now, and that there's been a path that has been laid about how to speak truth to power that rose in the 60s and 70s. And I think that bore a new generation of youth that are really in a different space on a lot of these things. And I find that I'm catching up to some of these things. There's ideas around intersectionality that I am new to, that I am learning about. There are concepts like if you asked Black Lives Matter to come sit at the table with the police department, they would say no, because they don't believe in change in that structure or system. They're not looking to change the system, they're looking for new systems. So I think that it is all in the direction of justice. I think it's manifested differently. I think their inclusion feels different in that space. I look at folks like Darius Ballinger, who does amazing work, who is like a youth in this movement, and look to him for counsel on the direction that we're moving in. But we're all in the fight together. We just might have different language and different approaches. Yes, ma'am.
personally, I like to deal with things of importance, things that are really, affecting us as a community. And I hold those type of events. And when I make grants, when I write grants, and I explain these type of things in the grants, they're always refused. It seems like they want a sugar-coated, watered-down, nothing.
Right.
And that's the problem that I have with these foundations, and I think that needs to be addressed. We cannot keep having our parties and barbecues when we're dining now.
Amen. Yes, sir.
One last thing, Ms. Powers, and to her point, I end up in a lot of meetings, and there are some meetings that I have inside of our office, and I get ready to leave the house, and I tell my fiance, I said, baby, I'm probably gonna get fired today. And she said, what did you do? I said, well, here is the thing. They want to do this, that, and this. And I said, which is wonderful, but it's impressive and not going to be impactful. And on a number of occasions, as you talked about how, and I forget the terminology in which you used it, but if I could just paraphrase, when you said that everybody that looks like us ain't necessarily for us or about us. And as I get older in government, I pick and choose carefully my battles I fight, but there's some battles based upon my upbringing and my rearing that I can't ignore. And I have to wait sometimes until I get to the comptroller and get her in a space. And she says, let's go eat lunch. And I said, okay, well, I got her now. Because that's the time I can say, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing this. But I was told this. And she said, so what do you think? And I said, okay, this has the potential to affect this. Yeah, that's going to be good. That's going to get us a lot of press. That's going to get us a lot of film. I said, but on the backside, and even though there's a separation between government and politics, when I'm on state time, I have to say, but down the road. I have to use that terminology, down the road, that has the potential to do this. And sometimes I have to just go in and take an Esther position. If I could use that for a term, And it is not easy because each day, all of my bosses are 25 years younger than me and do not look like anybody in this room. And their thing, and now we're moving from elected officials to government officials. They're interested in tweaking and shaping and making government run efficiently because that's what they hear us saying. But that ain't what we ought to be saying. And that's a real big factor in a room, because an elected official is a person elected for and by the people and should be listening to the people. But when they see the turmoil within us, and especially us, because we cannot get together, in one room and have a discussion.
Thank you. And that's Mr. Tony Land that was sharing his comments. I do have his cards with the Office of the Comptroller, so I'll be putting his cards on the table. Ms. Power, did you have anything else that you wanted to say?
I just want to say in closing, one thing I'm really honored to have my sister here, Lisa Williams, who I think is nodding her head to what you are saying, Tony, because she works at the state of Illinois on diversity, right? So she understands exactly what you're saying. This morning when I was driving down here, I drove right by 1701, which is where we grew up in Prairie Shores, and drove right by Dunbar, which is where my mother used to teach. She was a Chicago public school teacher. Yesterday was the anniversary of our mother passing, so I'm just so honored to be here, and thank you for giving me this experience this morning. Alana.
African American, Latina, Asian, and Native American.
Arab, Native American. African, Latino, Asian, Arab, Native American. Extra A, 2 A's. Thank you.